Carl Friedrich de Drais, the hobby horse. The modern bicycle, a high-tech action machine, controversial in the mountains, environmentally sound in the city, and spectacular in the air. The history of the bicycle started in the days of the stagecoach, when people had to rely on the muscle power of horses to transport them over bumpy roads in heavy wooden carriages. What the world needed was a vehicle which would reduce that dependence, a vehicle that could be propelled by human muscles. One of the first to rise to the technological challenge was Baron Carl Friedrich de Drais de Sauerbrunn, who lived in the small backwater town of Gengenbach in southwestern Germany. Drais was a forestry official employed by the Grand Duke of Baden, but he was also a passionate inventor, and in 1816 started to run trials on a new machine, the hobby horse. His brainchild was the first steerable two-wheeled vehicle, one of the greatest inventions of the 19th century. It also featured a novel mechanism for adjusting the height of the seat. The father of the bicycle didn't use cranks to propel his wooden machine, even though they were already familiar to engineers. This was because Drais and his contemporaries were unaware of the stabilizing forces that prevent a rotating wheel from falling over, even when the rider's feet aren't on the ground. But Drais did incorporate a brake and brake cable. Marking the point where the cable was to run through the frame. He also added a balancing aid, a kind of chest support to help the rider keep his balance when travelling at speed. And he thought of lubrication for the steering, particularly important when the moving parts are of wood. As we can see, the lubricant doesn't need to be oil. A piece of bacon fat will do the trick. Although the machine looks cumbersome to ride, Drais's invention of the steerable front wheel marked the first milestone in the development of the bicycle. Drais was born in 1785 in Karlsruhe, where his father was a high-ranking civil servant and privy councillor to the Margrave of Baden. Young Drais felt drawn to the natural sciences and studied mathematics, physics and agriculture. Even as a young man, he was keenly interested in the idea of a horseless carriage and built several multi-wheeled vehicles. His early efforts, however, drew only scorn and ridicule. Finally, his experiments led him to a two-wheeled construction, which a practiced rider could propel at speeds up to 20 kilometers an hour. News of Drais's invention spread rapidly, reaching France, Britain, and even America. It was found that the machine ran perfectly well, even without its balancing aid. Falls were usually due to excessive speed and inspired many a humorous cartoon. Hobby horse riding developed into a craze, among women as well, who quickly became a target for caricaturists. Drais had patented his machine, but the hobby horses he made and labelled with this badge were copied without licence throughout Europe, so Drais didn't make much money out of his invention. he embarked on a research trip to Brazil, which was to last several years and effectively turned him into a social exile. But in Brazil, he found the inspiration for another invention, his rapid writing machine, a forerunner of the Morse alphabet. By then, however, no one was interested in either Drijs or his ideas. Dismissed as an eccentric, he eked out a meagre living with his hobby horse as a travelling showman. Not until 40 years after his death was a fitting monument erected to the inventor of the bicycle. Drijs was a practical man, unaware of the physical principles governing his invention. But why doesn't a bicycle fall over when it's moving? One reason is that it reacts like a gyroscope. As long as a gyroscope is static, it behaves normally. When it's spinning, though, it responds sharply to external forces with compensatory movements. This property, called precession, makes the gyroscope axis move as though it were hugging the surface of an inverted cone. The same thing happens to a bicycle. An external force acts on the wheel, which reacts by tilting and, by the law of precession, makes a perpendicular compensatory movement. Now a second force takes over, centrifugal force. All bodies locked on a circular path are subject to constant pressure away from the centre. Under this pressure, the wheel rights itself again and shoots past the vertical, and the sequence of cause and effect starts all over again. Self-stabilization is enhanced by the distance between the wheel's point of contact with the ground and the extension of the steering axis, the so-called caster length. This acts like a lever arm. The longer it is, the greater the directional stability. When a wheel describes a curve, it's forced out of the axis of the direction of travel. This exposes it to frictional forces which tend to push it back into axial alignment. The constant interplay of compensatory movements means that the wheel actually meanders along the road. For all practical purposes, though, it travels in a straight line. The phenomena discussed so far only partly explain why a bicycle works. And it doesn't need a rider to keep it upright, as scientists at Oldenburg University recently proved. But even without knowing the whys and wherefores, hobby horse riders discovered 150 years ago that they could balance perfectly well without touching the ground. The first self-propelled bicycle was built by a Scotsman, Kirkpatrick Macmillan. But it was the enterprising French coach builder, Pierre Michaud, who invented the first popular pedal-driven cycle. The pedals were attached directly to the front wheel, and the frame was made of iron. The first bold young ladies mounted the new two-wheeler. For the less adventurous, Michaud built a tricycle. Attached to the fine brass pedals were oil containers which doubled as counterweights. When it was found that balance was improved by enlarging the front wheel, bicycles grew into penny farthings. Cycling's initial impact was not as a means of transport, but as a popular leisure activity. Before long, city parks were being used as racetracks. But the penny farthing had one big drawback. Every time the rider braked, he risked being thrown head first over the handlebars. The problem was solved by a chain, enabling the pedals to be separated from the driving wheel. In Britain, 1874 saw the introduction of the safety bicycle. It had two wheels of equal diameter and pedals mounted between them, driving not the front but the rear wheel via an endless chain. By the turn of the century, the basic development of the bicycle was largely complete. Improvements that followed were hub gears for better transmission, derailleur gears, the free wheel, and various accessories such as bells and the first lights. Another milestone was set by the Irish vet John Dunlop, who introduced the pneumatic tyre, comprising an inflatable tube inside a hard rubber case, a solid rubber tyre, and the Dunlop, displaying its superior running properties. Cyclists were soon competing on city roads with the chic and expensive but evil-smelling automobile. Some reckless cyclists also came into conflict with pedestrians. And were promptly brought to book. The growing risk of accidents in urban areas prompted calls for the introduction of a licence for cyclists and for a highway code. Sports cyclists started to get organised, and trick cycling clubs appeared on the scene. Regular competitions were staged, such as the Tour de France, and new cycling sports emerged. Track racing and pursuit events presented a new sporting challenge in stadiums around the world. The folding bicycle was a military invention and is still sometimes used as a means of transport by infantry regiments today. Nowadays, bicycles are predominantly used for getting round town. They're particularly popular in the flat Netherlands. But the cycling nation, of course, is China. It's estimated that there are around 500 million bicycles here, making the humble push bike easily the most important means of personal transport in the country. Bicycle production today is largely automated. But many cyclists still prefer a handmade frame, crafted with painstaking attention to detail. The bicycle is the most popular means of transport in the world today, and a paragon of environmental soundness and economic performance. No other vehicle can hold a candle to the descendant of Carl Friedrich Dreiss's invention when it comes to efficiently converting human energy into propulsion. And in its latest laid-back aerodynamic form, it's more efficient than ever.